Story 1. The Grandmother's Road. This story takes place when I was a junior high school student. During those strange years when you're caught between childhood and adulthood. Old enough to be sent on errands alone, but young enough to still be terrified of the dark. One morning during summer vacation, after my father went to work, my mother and I decided to visit my maternal grandmother who lived in a rural area, the kind of place where the modern world seems to have forgotten to arrive, where time moves differently and the old ways still hold power over the land and the people who live there. Since my grandmother's house was located deep in the countryside, getting there required making a left turn off the main road, then driving for 5 minutes through a narrow, one-car-wide, unpaved road, the kind of road that feels like it's leading you away from civilization and into some older, darker place. There were rice fields on both sides of the unpaved road, stretching out into the distance like green oceans, and forests beyond them, thick and impenetrable. The kind of forests that appear in fairy tales as places where children get lost and never return. As soon as we arrived, I greeted my grandma with the proper respect, bowing and using the formal phrases she had taught me when I was small. And then I went into my youngest uncle's room because I used to like visiting my grandmother's house for one specific reason. My uncle was a huge gaming fan, and his computer was much better than mine at home, with a graphics card that could actually run the newer games without lagging or crashing. And once I confirmed my uncle was at work, I turned on his computer and started playing Doom 3, which used to be the most popular horror game at that time, full of demons and darkness and jump scares that made your heart race even though you knew they were coming. After playing the game for about an hour or two, losing myself in the virtual corridors of that Mars base where everything had gone wrong, my uncle returned from work earlier than expected, and upon his arrival my grandmother asked him to take her grocery shopping since my mother, my aunt and I were visiting her house and she wanted to prepare a proper meal for all of us. So, at about 7 in the evening, they all drove to town to do some grocery shopping, leaving me alone in the house. And I was super excited and waved goodbye to them from the window because I knew exactly what this meant. It meant I had the computer to myself for at least another 90 minutes. Maybe more if they stopped to chat with neighbors or browse the stores. And I could play Doom 3 without anyone looking over my shoulder or telling me it was too violent or too scary for someone my age. After enjoying about 90 minutes of free time, fully immersed in the game's atmosphere of dread and isolation, my uncle called on the house phone, and he said he was about to turn left onto the unpaved road when one of the front wheels was punctured by something sharp, probably a piece of metal or a broken bottle, and he asked me to bring him a new tire which was stored in the shed behind the house. As I said before, after making that left turn, it took about 5 minutes to drive through the narrow, unpaved single-lane road to reach my grandmother's house. But it took about 20 to 30 minutes on foot, especially if you were carrying something heavy like a tire.
This was it.
Now that I think about it, it was quite scary to walk on that road, especially at night, because it had no street lights and was surrounded by rice fields and forests on both sides. And the only light came from the moon when it bothered to show itself between the clouds. It was almost 9 in the evening, and that area got quite dark at about 8 o'clock because it was so far from the city, so far from any source of artificial light, and the darkness there was different from city darkness. It was complete and absolute and suffocating. To be honest, I was really scared. My hands were actually shaking as I hung up the phone. But not wanting anyone to know I was a coward, not wanting my uncle to think less of me or my grandmother to worry, I decided to go. I grabbed the tire from the shed, feeling its weight and rough rubber texture. Left the house and locked the door behind me, and started walking along the unpaved road toward where my uncle and family were waiting. The tire was heavier than I expected and awkward to carry, and I had to stop every few minutes to adjust my grip and catch my breath. And each time I stopped, the silence of the countryside pressed in around me like something physical. I could see my uncle's car in the distance, the headlights shining toward me like two big yellow dots, weak but reassuring in all that darkness. And I was a bit relieved knowing my uncle and family were on the other end of this road, that I wasn't completely alone out here, even though it felt like I was. But the night was so dark, darker than any night I had experienced in the city. And that darkness deepened my fear in ways I couldn't fully understand or articulate. It was like the darkness itself was alive and watching me. You know, when you walk in the darkness, your eyes start to adjust and you begin to see unclear shapes. Shadows that might be trees or might be something else. And your brain tries to make sense of these shapes by filling in the details. Except sometimes the details your brain fills in are worse than reality. I felt like I could see someone standing in the rice field to my right, completely motionless, just standing there watching me walk past. And I told myself it was just a scarecrow or a post or a trick of the light. But scarecrows don't have that particular human shape, that particular tilt of the head that suggests awareness and attention. I saw what looked like someone sitting down in the bushes to my left, resting his chin on his hands and looking at me through the branches. And I tried to convince myself it was just rocks or a stump or shadows. But rocks don't have eyes that follow your movement, and stumps don't shift their weight slightly as you pass. I broke out in a cold sweat despite the cool night air, and I held my legs steady to keep them from shaking. Concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other and not running, because if I started running, I knew I would lose control completely. It felt scarier than being alone on a pitch-dark night would normally feel. And I realized with growing horror that it was because of the fear and the delusions I had created in my own mind. My imagination was turning every shadow into a threat, every sound into a footstep, every movement of wind through the rice into something approaching. I remember feeling really dizzy, like the world was tilting slightly, like the road beneath my feet wasn't quite solid anymore. And I wondered if this was what going crazy felt like. If madness started with seeing things in the darkness that shouldn't be there. After walking for about 20 minutes, my arms aching from carrying the tire and my shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold, I looked toward my uncle's car and realized I was nearly there. Maybe another 3 or 4 minutes at most. Feeling happier and more relieved than I had any right to feel, I rolled the tire faster, eager to hand it over to my uncle and get into the safety of the car with its doors and windows and locks. Eager to be surrounded by my family again and leave this terrible road behind. But then I saw something in front of me, blocking the path between me and the distant headlights. And I wasn't sure what it was, because it was still a bit away from me, maybe 50 meters or so, but it was something dark and low to the ground. Suddenly, I felt strange, a creeping wrongness that started in my stomach and spread throughout my entire body. And I slowed down because some instinct told me I needed to be careful, needed to see what this thing was before I got too close. I strained my head and neck, trying to look carefully, squinting into the darkness and wishing desperately that the moon would come out from behind the clouds. But it was too dark and the shape remained unclear, just a darkness against darkness, a void in the shape of something that shouldn't exist. Although I was scared, terrified actually. I started to walk again because what choice did I have? I couldn't go back and I couldn't stand there forever. And my family was waiting just beyond whatever this thing was. I kept thinking nothing is going to happen because I have my uncle and family about 300 meters away. They would hear me if I screamed. They would see me if something went wrong. I wasn't really alone, even though every cell in my body insisted that I was. But when I got closer to it, close enough that the details started to become visible in the dim light from the distant headlights, I stopped walking because it became clearly visible and my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. It was an old woman squatting on the side of the road with her mouth hanging open, looking at the rice fields with an expression of complete vacancy. And I could only see the side of her face, but my whole body shivered because her blank facial expression with her mouth open was now clearly visible in the darkness. And there was something fundamentally wrong about her presence here. Without realizing it, I had walked really close to the old woman. Close enough to hear her breathing if she was breathing. Close enough to smell her if she had a smell. And for reasons I don't understand. Walking by without saying anything seemed even scarier than acknowledging her presence. So I started talking to her with a frightened voice that cracked and wavered. And I asked, "Excuse me, what are you doing here at night?" Trying to sound polite and respectful, the way my grandmother had taught me to address elders. But the words came out weak and pathetic. But she did not respond and kept looking at the rice field with that horrible blank expression, her mouth hanging open like a door that had been left ajar. And I realized I couldn't hear her breathing at all. Couldn't detect any sign that she was actually alive, rather than some kind of mannequin or sculpture. On the verge of crying, my voice breaking completely, I shouted "Excuse me" in a louder voice, almost aggressive now because fear was turning into frustration and frustration into something like anger. She then looked at me and I felt my heart tightening in my chest, squeezing so hard I thought it might stop completely. And even though it was dark, I could clearly see she had firm white hair. The kind of white that doesn't exist in nature. The kind of white that seems to glow faintly with its own light. I could only see the white parts of her eyes. No iris, no pupil. Just white like eggs, or pearls, or bones. And those eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made me want to vomit. The scariest thing were the huge wrinkles and stains covering her face. Wrinkles so deep, they looked like cracks in old leather, and stains that might have been age spots, or might have been something else, something darker and more disturbing. Her wide open mouth was a black hole in her face, and I couldn't see any teeth or tongue inside, just darkness, just an opening into nothing. I felt strange, like I was going crazy or having a nightmare while awake. And while I was looking at her, I realized we had eye contact, but the geometry was wrong. She was looking down at me even though I was standing, and she was squatting on the ground. After a few moments of this impossible eye contact, moments that felt like hours, she turned her body toward me with a movement that was too smooth, too fluid, like she was on a mechanism or being controlled by strings. Oh my God, I thought she was sitting down normally, thought her legs were folded beneath her. But I realized with a horror so profound it felt like dying that she had no lower body at all. Nothing below her torso, no legs, no hips, nothing. She only had a torso and head which was supported from the ground with 2 arms. 2 impossibly long arms that seemed to have extra joints. And those arms were holding her upper body upright, like some kind of grotesque tripod. A flood of thoughts crossed my mind, but most of them weren't even words. Just pure animal panic. Just the desperate need to flee. And I remember thinking, there is Satan right in front of me, or a demon, or something that shouldn't exist in the real world, something that belonged in the game I had been playing or in folk tales told to scare children. I felt like she was going to run at me with her 2 arms if I didn't move. Felt like she was gathering herself to launch forward and grab me with hands that probably felt like ice or like nothing at all. Hands that would pull me down into the darkness, or into the rice field, or into whatever hell she had crawled out of. So I grabbed the tire in my arms and sprinted with my eyes closed tightly, running blind because seeing was worse than not seeing. Running toward where I hoped my uncle's car was and praying I wouldn't trip or stumble or run off the road into the fields. I don't remember how long I had been running. Time had stopped meaning anything. But I remember my lungs burning and my legs screaming and the tire slipping in my grip. And I remember thinking, I can't stop. If I stop, she'll catch me. If I stop, I'll die here on this road and no one will ever know what happened. Then suddenly everything went black and I felt myself falling. Felt the impact of hitting the ground, but from very far away. Like it was happening to someone else. And then there was nothing at all. Just a void without dreams or thoughts or fear. It was the next morning when I woke up and I was in my grandmother's room, lying on the futon with a wet cloth on my forehead, and sunlight was streaming through the window in a way that seemed impossible after all that darkness. When I asked my mother what happened, she said she had been waiting for me in the car with the others, and they saw me sprinting down the road with my head down holding the tire in my arms, running like something was chasing me. And then I suddenly fell off the side of the road and collapsed, causing my family to come out of the car shocked and terrified. After listening to my mother, I told her and my other family members what I went through on that road.
I was walking home.
Described the old woman with no legs and white eyes and that horrible mouth. And they all looked at each other with expressions I couldn't read. Story 3. The Haunted House. About 10 years ago, my 3-year-old son and I moved to a house from our apartment. And it seemed like a good decision at the time because we needed more space and the rent was surprisingly affordable. So affordable that I should have asked myself why no one else had taken it already. It was a very old building, the kind with thick walls and high ceilings and doorways that were slightly shorter than modern ones, as if it had been built for a different kind of people, a different era when the world worked according to different rules. Inside of the house always seemed to be just a little darker than it should have been, even during the middle of the day with all the curtains open and sunlight streaming through the windows. There was a quality to the light that made it seem filtered or diminished somehow, as if the house itself was absorbing the brightness and leaving only shadows. It was just a little colder than it should have been too, and I kept turning up the thermostat, but it never seemed to make any difference. The cold came from somewhere else, somewhere deeper than the walls or the foundation. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with absence. Not long after we moved in, a friend of mine came to visit, and I was excited to show her the place and prove that I had made a good decision. That my son and I were going to be happy here in this house that was ours. The whole time we were sitting and talking, she seemed very uncomfortable, shifting in her seat and glancing around the room as if she was looking for something or trying to avoid looking at something. And I noticed her cup of tea sat untouched on the table between us, getting cold. When I looked at her face more carefully, I noticed that something in the other room had caught her attention, something I couldn't see from where I was sitting. And her eyes grew wide in a way that made my stomach drop. She said, "I have to go," in a voice that was too loud and too sudden. And she stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made me wince. I asked her what was wrong, tried to laugh it off, as if nothing unusual was happening. But she refused to tell me and headed toward the door with quick steps that were almost running. Her odd reaction was freaking me out, so I kept after her, following her to the entryway and asking again what she had seen, what had made her so desperate to leave. On her way out the door, she finally blurted out, "This house is haunted," the words tumbling out like she couldn't hold them in anymore. But she wouldn't tell me what it was she had seen or what made her think so. Wouldn't elaborate no matter how much I pressed her. To this day, she still refuses to tell me what she saw in that other room. And I've asked her dozens of times over the years, but she just shakes her head and changes the subject. And I can see in her eyes that whatever it was still terrifies her. About a week later, my 3-year-old son casually asked me who the old lady in the bathroom was. And the way he said it was so matter-of-fact, so innocent, like he was asking about a neighbor or a relative who had stopped by to visit. I felt ice water run down my spine because I knew we were alone in the house. Had been alone since we moved in, and there was no old lady anywhere. When I asked him what old lady he meant, he just shrugged and said, "The one who watches him when he takes a bath. The one who stands in the corner by the sink and doesn't say anything." And he described her as having white hair and a long dress and a face that looked sad. One day, I was leaving the house for work, already running late and thinking about the meeting I had that morning. And I got to the car and realized I needed to run back inside to get my phone, which I had left charging on the kitchen counter. I walked into the house, and as soon as I got inside, before I had even closed the door behind me, this framed photo on the wall shot off the wall with tremendous force. And it didn't fall down the way a picture would if the nail had come loose. It shot horizontally away from the wall as if it had been thrown by invisible hands. It traveled at least 6 feet through the air before it landed on a side table with enough force to break some of the decorative tiles off of it. Tiles that shattered and scattered across the floor like evidence of violence. I felt like whatever was in the house was pissed and angry that I had come back in after it thought I had left for the day. Like I had interrupted something or violated some unspoken rule about when I was allowed to be in my own home after living in the house for about 6 months. 6 months of cold spots and strange sounds, and my son's casual mentions of the old lady who watched him. I noticed a weird square cut into the boards on the deck out back. A section that didn't quite match the rest of the planking and seemed deliberately different. There was no handle or any obvious way to open it, but I was able to pry it up with a screwdriver after working at it for several minutes. And underneath was darkness, just a black rectangle leading down into nothing. The hole was just big enough for a person to fit through if they were careful. And there was a wooden ladder going down into the darkness. The rungs worn smooth by hands that had climbed up and down countless times before. For some reason, I went down even though every instinct told me not to. Even though my hands were shaking on the ladder rungs and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And I found myself in what looked like a homemade basement, except it wasn't really a basement in any proper sense. It was basically just a room dug out of the earth with no constructed walls or stone supports or anything like that. Just packed dirt on all sides and wooden beams overhead holding up the deck above. And the air down there was thick and damp and smelled like graves. It was very dark even with the light from the opening above, and I had to wait for my eyes to adjust before I could see anything clearly. And when they did adjust, I wished they hadn't. I could see something over in the corner, a shape that was too regular to be natural, too deliberate to be accidental. And as I moved closer, I realized it was a stone, but not just any stone. It was a suspicious-looking stone that looked exactly like one of those old headstones you see in cemeteries from the 1800s. The kind with carved letters that have been worn down by time and weather until they're almost unreadable. And I could make out what might have been a name and what might have been dates, but I couldn't be sure. Just then, some insects started jumping on me, dozens of them. Maybe crickets or grasshoppers, but bigger and faster. And they were in my hair and on my neck and crawling under my collar. So I got out of that basement as fast as I could, scrambling up the ladder and nearly falling in my panic to escape. I never went back down there, never even looked at that section of deck without feeling sick. And I tried to tell myself it was just an old stone that someone had used for decoration or foundation. Tried to convince myself there wasn't a body buried under my house, but I never quite believed it. Now this is the part that affected me the most. The part that made us leave the house and never look back. The part I still have nightmares about, even though it happened years ago. It's also the reason we moved out within a week of this incident. Packed up everything we owned and left in such a hurry that we didn't even tell the landlord we were going. Just disappeared in the middle of the night like fugitives. One night, I was in bed laying on my stomach, just about to fall asleep. In that comfortable, half-conscious state, where your thoughts start to dissolve into dreams and nothing seems quite real anymore. And I heard someone walk into my room. The footsteps came from the doorway where I had left the door slightly open so I could hear my son if he called for me. And they walked across the floor toward my bed with slow, deliberate steps. Not hurrying, not sneaking, just walking with purpose and confidence. I didn't realize until later, until I was replaying the memory over and over, trying to make sense of it, that the fact I heard the footsteps was weird because the room was carpeted. Thick carpet that absorbed sound and made footsteps nearly silent. But these footsteps were clear and distinct, like someone walking on hardwood or tile. When the footsteps reached my bed, I felt someone put their hands on my back. Two hands just gently laid flat against my shoulder blades. And they were cold, so cold it felt like ice or metal. Cold that went through my shirt and into my skin and deep into my bones. The hands kept me there, pressed down with gentle but firm pressure, not hurting me, but making it very clear that I was not supposed to move, that I was supposed to stay exactly where I was. I assumed it was my son, thought maybe he had come into my room because of a nightmare, or because he needed something. And I asked, without opening my eyes or turning my head, "What are you doing?" Trying to sound patient and parental, even though something felt wrong. But there was no answer, just silence, and those cold hands pressing against my back. And after a moment, I asked again, a little louder this time, a little more insistent, but still there was no response. I looked up, finally opening my eyes and turning my head to see who was behind me. And no one was there. The room was empty, just shadows and the faint light from the hallway. I got up immediately, my heart racing and my skin covered in goosebumps. And I checked my son's bed in the next room, moving quickly down the hallway and pushing open his door without knocking. He was in bed, fast asleep, his small body curled under the blankets and his breathing slow and steady. And when I touched his shoulder to make sure he was real, he stirred slightly but didn't wake up. Just made a small sound and rolled over. We moved out soon after that, and we never looked back, never drove past that house again. Never even mentioned it except in the most general terms. And I still refuse to tell people the address because I don't want anyone else to live there. Don't want anyone else to experience what we experienced. The cold hands on my back, that sensation of being held down by something invisible, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. It stays with me even now, years later. A tactile memory that I can feel whenever I think about it. Sometimes I wonder what was in that basement, what the gravestone marked, whose hands those were that pressed against my back with such gentle insistence. And I wonder if the old lady my son saw was the same presence my friend had glimpsed in that other room, or if there were multiple things in that house, multiple spirits or entities or whatever you want to call them. I wonder if they're still there now, waiting in the darkness and the cold, waiting for the next family to move in and ignore the signs. The next set of residents who will convince themselves that old houses just creak and settle, that children just have overactive imaginations, that there's always a rational explanation for everything. But I know better now. I know that some houses are not meant to be lived in, that some spaces belong to the dead and the dead don't like to share, that there are places where the boundary between our world and whatever comes after becomes thin and permeable and dangerous. The landlord called me dozens of times after we left, angry at first and then concerned and then angry again, leaving voicemails asking where we went and why we broke the lease and demanding we return his keys. But I never answered, and eventually he stopped calling. I heard through a friend that the house sat empty for almost 2 years after we left, that other families would move in and move out within weeks or months, that the landlord kept lowering the rent but couldn't keep tenants no matter how cheap he made it. I heard that eventually he sold the property to a developer who planned to tear it down and build something new, something modern that wouldn't carry the weight of whatever history that place contained. And I hope they did tear it down. Hope they demolished it completely and salted the earth and built something clean and bright and new. But sometimes I doubt it. Sometimes I drive past that neighborhood and I swear I can feel that house still standing there, still waiting, still cold and dark inside even on the brightest summer day. And I wonder if you can really destroy a place like that, or if the demolition just spreads the contamination, scatters whatever lived there into the surrounding area like spores or radiation. My son is older now and he doesn't remember much about that house, or at least he claims he doesn't. And I've never pushed him to recall those memories, because some things are better forgotten. Some experiences should be allowed to fade rather than being preserved and examined. But sometimes I catch him staring at bathroom corners when he thinks no one is watching, and sometimes he hesitates before entering dark rooms. And I know that somewhere deep in his mind he remembers the old lady who watched him, remembers that presence that shouldn't have been there. The hands that touched my back that night were not human hands. I'm certain of that now. They were too cold and too deliberate and too knowing. They understood exactly what they were doing when they held me down and kept me from turning around, kept me from seeing whatever stood behind me in that carpeted room. Some nights I still wake up feeling pressure on my back, feeling those hands again, and I have to turn on every light in my apartment and check every room before I can convince myself I'm alone, that nothing followed us when we fled that house in the middle of the night. They say houses can't be evil, that they're just wood and stone and glass, just structures without consciousness or intent. If you're in a dark room with headphones on and you feel suddenly cold, if you sense something behind you that wasn't there a moment ago, maybe it's time to turn on a light. Subscribe so it doesn't find you tomorrow night. Like if you made it, sleep carefully tonight. And remember that carpeted floors aren't supposed to echo with footsteps. And remember that when something touches you in the dark, it's not always someone you know. Story 1. The Park Abduction. I was 15 years old when I learned that evil doesn't announce itself with thunder or warning signs. It simply appears in the fading light of an ordinary evening and tries to steal everything you love. My mother had gone out shopping that afternoon, leaving me in charge of the house. And I took that responsibility seriously because I was the oldest, and that's what oldest children do. They pretend to be adults even when they're terrified inside. It was starting to get dark. That particular kind of darkness that comes in early winter when the sun seems to give up and surrender to the night without putting up much of a fight. And I realized my little brother was nowhere to be found. I checked his room first, then the backyard, then the basement, calling his name in that increasingly frantic way that parents do when they can't find their children. Except I wasn't a parent. I was just a kid myself. A kid who was supposed to be watching another kid. I asked my sister if she knew where he was, and she said he had gone to the park around the corner to kick his soccer ball around. And something about the casual way she said it made my stomach tighten, because the park was public and open and full of spaces where bad things could happen. I told her to watch the house while I was gone and ran off in the direction of the park, my sneakers slapping against the pavement in a rhythm that matched my racing heart. When I got there, I was surprised to find the park completely empty. The swings moving slightly in the wind like ghosts of children who had played there hours before. The slide reflecting the last bits of daylight in a way that seemed almost accusatory, as if the playground equipment itself was judging me for losing track of my brother. I called out my brother's name, but there was no answer, just the sound of wind through the trees and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. And I started to get worried in that deep, primal way that makes your hands shake and your vision narrow. All of a sudden, I heard a faint muffled noise coming from my left. Something that didn't belong in the empty park. Something that sounded wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify, but that made every instinct in my body scream danger. I turned just in time to see a tall figure disappearing behind a large fence at the far end of the park. Moving quickly, but not running. Moving with the confidence of someone who believed they wouldn't be caught or didn't care if they were. I sprinted as fast as I could, faster than I had ever run in my life. Faster than during any race at school or any game with friends. Because this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about something far more fundamental and terrifying. When I came around to the other side of the fence, I saw something that almost made me choke in horror. A sight that would replay in my mind every single night for years afterward, burned into my memory like a brand. My little brother was being dragged down the alleyway by a tall man, his small body limp and unresisting. His soccer ball abandoned on the ground behind them like evidence of a crime in progress. A coup into a rage that I didn't know existed inside me. A white-hot fury that burned away every trace of fear and replaced it with something pure and violent and necessary. Tears of anger streamed down my face as I ran toward them. My vision blurring, but my purpose crystal clear. And I didn't think about what might happen to me, or whether this man might have a weapon, or whether I was strong enough to fight him. I only thought about my brother and getting him away from this monster. The tall man must have heard me coming because he turned around and faced me. And even in the dim light of the alley, I could see his expression change from confidence to surprise. And he dropped my younger brother onto the concrete like he was nothing more than a discarded piece of trash. The tall man tried to grab me, but I was running at him so fast that when I slammed into him, it knocked him off his feet. And we both went down hard onto the alley pavement. And I felt something in my shoulder pop, but I didn't care because pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except stopping this man from ever touching my brother again. He swore and tried to get back up, but I just started stomping on his face without stopping. Without thinking, without asking questions. and I felt bones crunch under my sneakers and heard him make sounds that weren't quite screams and weren't quite words. And some distant part of my mind registered that I was capable of killing another human being if pushed far enough. I picked my brother up and ran as fast as I could back to our house, carrying him even though he was heavy and my shoulder was screaming in pain. And by this time, it was pitch black outside and my mother was home. She was frantic with worry, pacing in the living room with her phone in her hand, probably about to call the police or the hospital or both. And when she saw the look on our faces, something worse than just being late for dinner or forgetting to check in. As I explained what had occurred, my brother and I started crying, and my mum gave us both the biggest hug ever, and she cried with us. And for a few minutes, we just stood there in the entryway holding each other and sobbing. And it felt like the only safe place in the entire world was inside that embrace. Eventually the police were called and they took our statements, and I described the man as best I could. His height and build, and the rough texture of his jacket, and the smell of cigarettes and something else, something chemical and wrong. But the description wasn't enough. It's never enough. This guy was never found, and that's the part that haunts me more than anything else. The knowledge that he's still out there somewhere, that he probably tried again with some other child, that he might have succeeded the next time because there wasn't an older sibling running full speed toward him in a rage. Sometimes I wonder if I should have held him there instead of just running away, if I should have kept stomping until he couldn't get up anymore, if I should have made sure he would never be a threat to anyone ever again. But I was 15 and terrified, and my only thought was getting my brother to safety. The police told us we did the right thing, that I was brave, that I saved my brother's life. But bravery doesn't feel like bravery when you're doing it. It just feels like panic and desperation and the complete inability to imagine any other course of action. Now I see that alley everywhere. I see it when I close my eyes. I see it in every shadowy space between buildings. I see it in every park and playground. And I wonder how many other alleys there are in how many other cities where men like that are dragging children into the darkness. My brother doesn't remember much about that day, or at least he says he doesn't, and I hope that's true because some memories are too heavy for anyone to carry. But I remember everything, every detail, every sound. Every moment of that evening when I learned that monsters are real and they look like ordinary people and they walk among us every single day. Where are you watching this from? And what time is it there right now in your part of the world? I wonder if you're alone in the dark like I was, or if you're somewhere safe with the lights on. The first person to answer a question correctly will receive a small reward from me, the storyteller tonight, as a way of saying thank you for watching and supporting. So tell me this, what was abandoned on the ground in that alley? The last innocent thing before everything changed. Some evils are never caught, never punished, never stopped. They simply move on to the next victim and the next and the next. And all we can do is remember and watch and try to protect the ones we love.